Welcome! Let's take a journey back in time to a place and an era that's so often misunderstood. We're talking about Arabia, right before the rise of Islam.
So, let's just dive right in with the big question. What did people in Arabia actually believe in before the 7th century? What was going on?
For a lot of us, the image that probably pops into our heads is something like this. A huge, vast desert, dotted with tribes, and pretty much everyone worshiping the same set of idols. You know, a simple kind of primitive paganism.
But what if I told you that picture is a massive oversimplification? Honestly, the truth is way more fascinating. Ancient Arabia was this incredible patchwork of different regional religions, and each one had its own gods, its own myths, and its own rituals.
Okay, to really get a handle on this, let's break it down. First up, in one land, many faiths. We're going to have to rethink what religion even meant back then. And how do we even know what we know?
This quote from the Encyclopedia Britannica is huge. It says pre-Islamic Arabian religion was, and I quote, local, tribal, ritual-based, and non-systematized. Now, just let that sink in for a second. That means there was no single church, no one holy book for everybody, and definitely no central religious authority for the whole peninsula.
So, how do we piece this giant puzzle together? Well, scholars are like historical detectives. Their bedrock evidence is something called epigraphy. Think of it like ancient graffiti. Thousands and thousands of inscriptions carved directly into rock. Then you've got archaeology, actually digging up temples and altars. We also find clues in beautiful pre-Islamic poetry. And of course, in later Islamic sources, though historians are always super careful to use those with a critical eye. The real magic happens when they line all this evidence up to build the most accurate picture they can.
So let's start our tour. We're going to begin way down in the south, in what's modern-day Yemen. This was home to some really powerful and sophisticated kingdoms.
And let me tell you, religion here was anything but simple. We are talking about highly organized state cults that were deeply woven into the fabric of the government. They had formal professional priesthoods, and their temples were actually major economic engines. And what were they focused on? The stars. A lot of their worship revolved around astral deities, the sun, the moon, and the planet Venus.
So let's meet a few of the major players, right? You had Almaka, who is the national god of the incredible kingdom of Saba, you might notice Sheba, and he was tied to their amazing agricultural systems. Then there was Athar, a powerful god of thunderstorms and fertility. You had Shams, a really important sun goddess, and Wad, a moon god. These weren't just local spirits, these were major state-level gods.
So here's a really important takeaway. The religion of South Arabia looked a lot more like ancient Mesopotamia than it did like the Arabia of Mecca. Seriously, think of ancient Sumeria or Babylon with their grand temple complexes and state gods. It was a completely different religious universe from what was happening just a few hundred miles north.
Okay, let's pack our bags and travel north, up to the great crossroads of culture. We're talking about amazing places like Petra and Palmyra, which were these bustling hubs right on the major ancient trade routes.
And because this area was such a cultural melting pot, you get something really fascinating called syncretism. It's when local Arabian beliefs start to mix and blend with these heavy influences from the Greco-Roman world and the Levant. Gods and ideas were being traded right alongside spices and silk.
A perfect example of this is a god named Dushara, which means Lord of the Mountain. He was the top god for the Nabateans, the incredible people who built Petra. He was a god of the sky, fertility, and rain. But over time, he started to get identified with big-name Greek gods like Zeus, king of the gods, or even Dionysus, the god of wine. It's just a fantastic snapshot of how cultures were merged.
All right, now let's head to the region most people think of first, the Hijaz, in central Arabia, which is home to the city of Mecca. So, what was its special role in this really diverse landscape?
Well, this region had its own very distinct group of deities. Inside the famous Kaaba, for example, there was an idol of Hubal, a god people consulted for divination. But there were also three incredibly powerful goddesses: Al-Lat, who was tied to war and prosperity, Al-Uzza, whose name literally means the mightiest, and Manat, the goddess who decided your fate. Now, it's so important to remember, these were the big gods for the tribes in this specific area.
But here's the insight that really changes everything. Think of Mecca not as a theological capital, but as a ritual marketplace. What on earth does that mean? It means it was a hub, a central point where tribes from all over would come for pilgrimages to perform rituals. But, and this is the key, it was not the source of a single, unified religious belief system for all of Arabia. Not at all.
And that brings us to one of the most important and honestly most misunderstood topics of all,
the Allah question. What was the role of the word, the concept of Allah before Islam came along?
Okay, let's get really clear on this. What scholars tell us, based on inscriptions and a ton of other evidence, is that Allah was understood as a high God, a kind of supreme being. And this was acknowledged across many different regions. In fact, the term was even used by Arab Christians and Jews to refer to their God. But, and this is so crucial, Allah was not a moon god. That's a pretty modern myth. He wasn't a specific local idol. He wasn't represented by statues. And for most people, he wasn't really the focus of their day-to-day ritual. So, what do you call a belief system like that? Well, the term scholars use is henotheism. Henotheism is the belief in one supreme high God, in this case Allah. And here's the twist, without denying that other, lesser divine beings or intermediaries also exist. Think of it like a divine hierarchy.
And this really gets to the heart of the whole thing. The later Quranic critique, the big change that Islam introduced, wasn't about trying to convince people that a high God named Allah existed. Most people were already on board with that idea. The core issue, the big debate, was about the use of intermediaries, all those idols and lesser gods, to try and reach him. It was really a debate about direct versus indirect worship.
So let's zoom all the way out now and put all these fascinating pieces together. What we end up with is a true religious mosaic. This chart just pulls it all together so perfectly. Look at this. You have three totally different religious models operating in the same peninsula at the same time. Down south, you've got these organized astral state cults, almost like ancient Mesopotamia. Up north, in Nabatea, a syncretic, blended religion that looked a lot like Roman Syria. And then in the center, you have these tribal ritual hubs that function more like pre-state societies. It really was one land, but many, many different spiritual worlds.
So, if you remember one thing from all of this, let it be this. Ancient Arabia was not religiously primitive. It was religiously plural. It was a complex, diverse, and incredibly dynamic spiritual landscape.
And that leaves us with one last really powerful question to chew on. How does understanding this deep, pre-existing religious diversity, how does that change the story of what came next? It reframes the whole thing, doesn't it? The unification of Arabia wasn't the beginning of its history. It was a dramatic, revolutionary new chapter in a story that was already thousands of years old.